Hi, my name is Evil, and, well, that's not my real name, of course. It's a nickname. My real name is Dave. Why Evil, I've heard. You won't ask. Well, in my early 20s, I was nicknamed Eagle. I'd love to say it was because of my piercing eyes, high flight, and determination to mate for life, but I won't kid you. If you insist on knowing all the details, my nose is slightly crooked. A legacy of a turbulent youth. I could live with the name, so I was happy. After all, my best friend's nickname was Scrotus. No, Eagle was fine. Then, when I was 25, my sweet niece came up to me at a family party and, in a cute, girly whisper, asked me why I was named Evil. One question, one damn question, and I would have to spend the rest of my life explaining myself. I married Lisa 10 years ago after a rather long courtship. I wanted to be sure, and I wanted her to be sure. We Eagles mate for life, and I would never willingly end my marriage. I believe in what my parents' generation believed in. You make a conscious decision and then live with the consequences of that decision. I loved my wife, and as of the beginning and end of this story, I believe she loves me. Beyond that belief, I considered myself a modern man. I don't fit the old style, man talks, woman does. In my world, men and women can be equal. The fairy tale of 2.4 children and grandchildren was not for us. After 3 years of trying unsuccessfully, we decided to test me. Far from the fact that it was uncomfortable. Then we checked Lisa. Malformed ovaries. We optimistically asked the doctor if this meant she would have trouble conceiving. He replied that no, she would never be able to get pregnant. I pretended that this was okay, as I could see that Lisa was devastated. I told her that I was fine with that. I could be happy just loving her for the rest of my life. Lying is acceptable when you love someone and are married for life. Besides, modern couples tend to be childless. I still loved her when her changed attitude cost her a customer service rep position, and she didn't feel confident enough to look for another. Or when her decreased activity level caused her to put on a little weight. When she stopped dressing nicely or wearing makeup, I still loved her. Eagles mate for life, and don't let temporary mood swings kick their mate out of the nest. Modern men are stepping up and trying their best. This angry eagle spared no compliments, bought his companion flowers and gifts, and took her on vacation twice a year. Although he himself was trying to develop his budding electrical contracting business and could not afford such a vacation. This eagle's inner restlessness should have manifested itself when our circle of friends began to fade. But it didn't, as the fading process was very slow and imperceptible. As the couples in our friendship circle fulfilled their social duty and had children, they gradually faded away as friends. It was only later that I realized that once they had a child, Lisa gradually distanced herself from them. Since she controlled our social calendar, I was unaware of these connections. One of the impetus for my further actions was the realization that, as the primary breadwinner, I had also become the primary entertainer. The modern man took it all calmly. I noticed that the nest environment was gradually changing. When Lisa first finished work, she was enthusiastic about the house, cooking, and gardening. Our house went from well-maintained to immaculate. Our garden became the object of everyone's admiration. It was clearly loved and cared for. At least twice a week I came home, and strange, exotic smells wafted from the kitchen. Life was good, except for our love life. Pretty much from the day she was given the dreaded diagnosis, our sex life began to slip from 5+ sessions a week to, well, I'm a little embarrassed to admit, 1+. Again, this decline was gradual and not immediately noticeable. In retrospect, I suppose that with sex and procreation so closely linked, and procreation now ruled out, it was inevitable that sex should have become psychologically uncomfortable. Modern man agreed that the change in the law to deny men the right to insist on their marital rights was right and necessary. Therefore, modern man had no choice but to suffer in silent disappointment. I just went back and reread the first page and a half of this diary and realized that I may have misrepresented Lisa somewhat. I don't want you to get the impression that she was perfect because she isn't. She does have some flaws, but loving partners accept them and don't notice them, don't they? Probably the thing that annoyed me the most was her, well, I can't even think of what to call it. When it came to sharing responsibilities, she would increase her efforts about 5 times and decrease mine by at least half. As a result, to get her to recognize that I was doing an equal share of the work, I had to do 10 times as much as she did. Even so, Things went on as they were. This could have been a source of contention in our marriage, but I'm an enlightened 21st century guy. I never expected my life partner to be perfect. This fairy tale nonsense is last century. I guess the major overhaul of my life began Thursday afternoon. To lighten the load on Lisa, I took up grocery shopping. On Thursdays, I did my major shopping on the way home. I met one of our former close friends who invited us over for a barbecue the next night. I didn't mind, so upon returning to the nest, I passed the offer on to my buddy. She immediately stated that since tomorrow was Friday, she was going to her weekly meditation and didn't think it was appropriate for a married man to go to a social evening alone. Oh, I forgot to mention the weekly meditation, did I? How ungracious of me to forget about Lisa's weekly climb out of the nest. Like many people who are no longer sure of their life's purpose, Lisa was searching for a higher meaning. In the old days, that void was filled by a god. The modern woman I married couldn't bring herself to follow that old path and joined a group I called Ancient Wisdom Recyclers. Every Friday, she and a group of other lost souls would gather and meditate. They would read each other's auras, invoke healing energies, and other nonsense that I, as a modern person, tried not to talk about. I was never encouraged or asked to participate. I wouldn't have fit in, right? I never met any of her meditation companions socially, but watched them on those rare occasions when I was asked to pick Lisa up after class. I think it's called Aquarian woman, even the 20% of them who have a penis. The men were soft, long-haired, effeminate, the kind that even makes modern man's palms itch. Women in previous generations would have been called hippies. Again, long hair, usually unkept, soft smiles, uninhibited by the 20th century symbols of male supremacy, bras. Although it was never proven, my imagination pictured lush armpit vegetation. In my opinion, Lisa was never part of that group. With her smooth armpits and love of materialism, how could she? None of the men seemed to be related to any of the women, and I was the only one picking out a spouse. Then I looked at the faces of Lisa's fellow astral traveling companions and stopped wondering. Not to sound ungrateful, but most of them had faces less attractive than my own armpits. Lisa plumbed the depths of my contemporaneity by telling me about Jenny's aura that night, or who was the recipient of healing energy that night. Modern man is ashamed to admit that he has passed out. More often than not, he goes to bed alone, and the modern woman meditates until it is time for the modern man's 8-hour nap. That's how I found myself alone on a Friday night, looking around an unkept house with untidy bags of takeout food from Wednesday, a house situated on a lot that increasingly resembled the deep Amazon. A lever in my brain switched from off to on. Web-filled neural pathways opened up. A conclusion was reached. Within the current understanding of the human condition, how could I get Lisa back on the rails? I had long suspected that the depression was caused by Lisa's deep realization that, evolutionarily speaking, she had no purpose. That could have depressed anyone. It certainly depressed me. That's probably where this story begins. The next day, I began a campaign to convince my friend that she should seek treatment for depression. The campaign got off to a bad start, somewhere around the -100 mark, when Lisa began to deny having the disorder. Cursing himself, this modern man did what he should have done from the start. He researched the issue. And guess what? Most people who suffer from depression don't realize they have it. Thus began an awareness campaign. To be honest with myself, the results were staggering. Lisa steadfastly refused to consult unenlightened psychiatrists or even psychologists. Ancient Eastern people didn't believe in such things, and being a hippie was definitely not a disorder. Modern man has even been accused of being a caveman for not believing that healing energy can be summoned and sent to some sufferer with an ingrown toenail through the astral plane. After months of effort, the best I was able to achieve was Lisa's pliant agreement to seek the help of her group's guru to find an alternative counselor. This took another 2 weeks, and I was informed that the person in question was a lady named Thunderchild. Not a great start, but better than nothing. Counseling sessions were held on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I wish I could describe Thunderchild, but at the time of writing, I have not had the pleasure of meeting her. I was assured that she spoke professionally and the initial signs were good. After the first week, Lisa announced that the main problem seemed to be that she had no purpose in life. Thunderchild must have used a different form of this advice than what I've encountered in recent months. I was pleasantly surprised when Lisa's new life purpose, charitable volunteering on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, led to partial recovery. The self-absorption has diminished, although I had to impress upon her that since counseling sessions are from 3 to 3 in the afternoon, she still has time to prepare meals before then, so take-home snacks 5 times a week are not a necessity. This applied to housework as well. Gone was the lethargic Lisa. Back came a wife who cared about her appearance and showed a new lust for life. Even more pleasant was the end of authoritarianism. Depressed Lisa stopped making decisions, leaving me to fill the gap. That was over with, and democracy was back. To the point where Lisa started making unilateral decisions that rightfully should have been joint decisions. However, not all was so rosy. My suggestion that instead of volunteering 3 days a week, she could help me with the business was firmly rejected. She said she had to follow her counselor's instructions thoroughly, and apparently sacrifice without personal gain was critical. No hints forced her to cook on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so the modern man took up the first two of these, as he did himself, taking on the gardening chores. Amazon has been deforested, but in a good way. Perhaps the most significant indicator of profound change was the modern couple's revitalized sex life. Gone was the habit of having sex once a week. They have been replaced by regular Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights. I, a caveman, didn't complain about the lack of spontaneity in my gratitudes. All attempts at Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday were discarded in favor of solitary meditation late into the evening. Apparently, the daytime meditations were ineffective due to solar interference. In fact, were it not for one small thing, life would have been tolerable. Rejoicing at the increased frequency of intimate contacts, the modern man did not notice a decrease in quality for the first month. More and more often disappeared trembling reaction to my ardor. She was replaced, more and more frankly, by the Aquarius woman, who more and more convincingly resembled a corpse. The ever-vigilant and not-so-modern man once diplomatically brought it up, just to make sure she enjoyed it as much as she did. In retrospect, it was a carefully considered response. I was happy when this conversation sparked a more active response in the bedroom. I was unhappy that this reaction only lasted a week. A sensitive New Age man began to dread the thrice-weekly ritual, and one Thursday evening made excuses for breaking a new tradition. He was stunned by the aggression in response to his attempt to shirk his duty. He was, pardon my French, utterly confused. I was increasingly disturbed by more and more evidence of Lisa's apparent dependence on her counselor, Miss Thunderchild. She spoke this way and that, dominating many conversations. Under the pretense of wanting to thank Sage, I asked if I could have an audience with her. After consultation, an audience was denied. Discouraged, I stooped to waiting surreptitiously outside the meditation site on Friday evening. It is not known if Miss Thunderchild was among those who went out on those evenings. The only person who stood out among the outcasts of the 60s who left these evenings was the lady who locked herself in. She was almost as wide as she was tall, and if she challenged me to an arm wrestle, I'd probably claim I had a sore shoulder. So, you could say that the modern man was happier. The modern woman was getting back to normal, and except for some odd behavior, everything was acceptable. It got to the point that I came home one Thursday afternoon, but I didn't see the smells of dinner being prepared, but saw Lisa sitting next to two packed suitcases. More than embarrassed and concerned, I took the proffered seat across from her at the kitchen table for a little interrogation. About myself. Did I love her? Yes, I did. Did I think she loved me more than anyone else on this planet? Again, yes. Yes. Did I feel that her counselor knew what she was talking about? Yes, overall, I felt her counseling had a positive effect. Would I have agreed with her counselor's advice to go away for a few weeks to find myself? No, I would not. Would I consider her to belong to me? No, definitely not. At this point, the growing aggression was interrupted by the arrival of a text message on Lisa's cell phone. The modern woman always interrupts a face-to-face conversation to respond to a text message. Trying to remain modern, the man snatched the phone and slipped it into his pocket. Lisa objected, but resigned herself to the futility of a physical response. The modern man was much larger than the modern woman who resorted to words. If I realized that she loved me, and I loved her, but she didn't belong to me, why should I disregard wise counsel and let her find herself? The modern man refuses to accept any mission of self-discovery for his wife until he is informed of the purpose and scope of such a mission. For example, whether other men or even women can participate sexually in such a study. Black and white responses were set aside and the wording scrutinized. Words and phrases such as caveman, outdated heterosexual society, and polygamy were less carefully considered. Taking a pause to mentally summarize the facts, he believed her when she said she loved him, but extramarital sex was not ruled out in any absence from the family hearth. The modern man turned to his inner caveman. He reaffirmed his commitment to never voluntarily sever their union, but her leaving to find herself, without a credible promise of fidelity, would be prima facie evidence that she had broken their pact. I blacked out when it became clear that no such promise would follow. I caught only the repetition of the word caveman, and the frequent thunderchild said. Taking advantage of this time for reflection, I devised a plan of action that was definitely not appropriate for the modern male. I reached into her purse, pulled out her car keys, all her cash and cards, and then went back to her to remove her rings. Taking them off was easy since I knew she did it every Friday night. Free-spirited hippies didn't wear bras or wedding rings. Lisa pounced on me. She said I was the one who insisted she needed therapy, and now she was following the advice of her therapist, and I had no right to object. I replied that the right to object is my most basic democratic right, as is my basic demand for monogamy in marriage. She, as a modern woman, may well walk out of the gate and into the arms of another man or woman. I have never been able to decide which one, but she will do so as someone I no longer consider a wife, and certainly not under my care. A little taken aback by my sudden intransigence, Lisa resorted to her original plan for the evening. She picked up 2 bags and the rest of her purse and walked out the front door. I followed her, mentally concluding that, with no money or ability to hail a cab, Lisa was either acting on autopilot or someone was waiting for her on the street. I joined her on the porch and searched until I saw a car across the street with its headlights on. I rushed toward it, but saw it speed away with a roar. The Eagle has sharp eyes and memorized the license plate number. A very enraged modern woman followed me into the house. The tirade I unleashed was clearly unmodern and included several swear words common since the Middle Ages. The center of the tirade was again a contradiction between me wanting her to get well, but not allowing her to follow the counselor's advice. In the middle of the conversation, I headed off to bed, only to be told that she wasn't going to share a bed with a caveman. I agreed that she shouldn't and dragged a few armfuls of her stuff into the spare room. That night, the Eagle slept very poorly in its shelter. So I still can't figure out if there was an apology from Lisa the next morning. She assured me of her love and said that she had obviously misjudged my desire for her future happiness. For the sake of our 10-year marriage and the fact that she loved me deeply, she was going to seek emergency counseling by next Tuesday to see if there were alternatives to breaking up. She asked me if I could stick to the original plan if no alternatives were acceptable. The answer was no. In the spirit of détente, I did return the property to her. We parted on the terms of an uneasy truce. That evening, after preparing dinner, I drove to her meditation site. Noticing that her car was stationary, I sat down to wait. If there was a third person in our relationship, it was either meeting here or at her charity events. While I waited, I contacted a few dubious friends to get a name and address from the license plate number. Hopes were high. An hour after everyone but Lisa and Baba had left, I headed home, unable to keep my eyes open. The next day, I was awakened the way all men like to be awakened, unless of course they are in jail. It was reminiscent of the days of our courtship. I remembered to control my impulses and warn her before taking a money shot. An Aquarius woman doesn't do that. Afterward, she tried to kiss me. Even the modern man doesn't do that. There was a lot of apologizing that morning, both from Lisa and, through Lisa, from Thunderchild. Apologies for both of them underestimating my desire, nay, demand for monogamy. Lisa confirmed that emergency counseling had already begun, and I would be kept informed. She was alarmed that I might think as if she would ever begin a relationship with another man without my knowledge or consent. Almost certain that things were going my way, I let my guard down. Over the next 2 months, a new pattern emerged, not much different from the previous one. Charity continued 3 days a week, meditation once. I noticed that Thunderchild's name was mentioned less and less often, which meant that Lisa was no longer relying on her. That was a good thing. Despite her promises, Lisa never volunteered to tell me about her counselor's alternative plan and refused to be drawn when asked. We continued to meet every other week. Lisa continued to drive to her mother's house every other week, usually on Wednesdays. Another new aspect of my life was involvement in the local men's shed. This was a club of sorts that approached my company as a possible sponsor. After realizing that men probably have much less or no support network from other men than women have from other women, the men's shed came into being. It was a sort of social club where men could find common interests or simply share a worldview. Of course, there were too many divorcees among them, but that was a good thing. The first few visits opened my eyes as I saw men supporting each other emotionally, as women traditionally did. I made some good friends there and tried to go once a week, usually on Fridays and on Lisa's mother's nights. 2 months into the new deal, I became increasingly suspicious that Lisa was refusing to tell me about the substitute for her trip away from home to get to know herself better. It must be a pretty grand thing if it took me 2 months to finalize it. The frequency of our sex hasn't changed. However, after a brief increase in quality, it returned to its new meager norm. As an experiment, I declined her requests a couple times on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She was still very horny. Strange. Seeing no end to my insidious doubts, I made one phone call on Wednesday to move our relationship forward. I met Lisa at the door at 9:17 p.m. that same Wednesday night. Mother-in-law's night out. While she took off her coat, I inquired about her mother's health. Lisa replied that she was fine and began listing the old lady's current complaints. This continued until she followed me into the kitchen for the proffered cup of hot chocolate. There, she found herself face to face with her mother. She came to her senses rather quickly with the realization that I had tricked her. Lisa turned pale and then threw up in the sink. After her mother said a few words to her on the subject of honesty and integrity, she jumped out. The modern man, like a caring host, walked her to the door. When he returned, he went in search of his wife. While I was upstairs, I heard Lisa's car start and pull out of our circular driveway. The bitch even left the back door open when she was in a hurry. The next day when I left for work, she was still missing and not answering her cell phone. I found out over the phone that she hadn't contacted her mother. I spent some precious time reflecting on my long-standing commitment to mate for life and never knowingly throw my mate out of the nest. I came to the conclusion that nothing should change, no matter how abhorrent the circumstances. It was with a heavy heart that I returned home that Thursday night. Not surprisingly, Lisa wasn't there. Very surprisingly, she called shortly before 7 p.m., but after making sure I was home, she left. I don't remember if I was surprised or not when 15 minutes later I heard her car in the driveway. The modern man went to the door and through the small window saw that a second car had pulled up behind his car in the driveway. Lisa had by then gotten out of the car and walked over to the second car. A slender man about our age, 5 feet 10 inches tall, got out of the car and looked around the house. They held hands and he leaned over to kiss my wife briefly on the lips. I'll be the first to admit I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but you didn't have to be Einstein to realize I was seeing the opening gambit of the public aspect of Plan B. Perhaps it was nervousness that caused Lisa to shift from foot to foot. That usually meant she was in desperate need of the restroom. Perhaps one thing triggered the other. Before they had taken 2 steps toward the house, I was already standing in front of the door. Lisa and her friend froze. I saw him squeeze her hand for courage. Her words would remain in my soul for decades to come. David, this is Michael, the other man I love. I'm sorry you met like this, but after what happened last night, you made us act. I just wanted to bring him here to show you that he's a good guy and not a threat to you. I almost laughed at that last bit of information. It was obvious to Blind Freddy that slender Mick at 5'7" was no threat to muscular Dave. Mick didn't make eye contact with me, but glanced at Lisa as if to say, I thought you said your husband worked in an office. I guess he was either unaware of my physical characteristics or they were misrepresented. At this point, my guess proved correct as Lisa walked past me through the door and headed for the restroom, with Michael following her. The modern man followed Lisa through the door. The caveman stepped forward and punched Michael in the solar plexus with a thick fist. The caveman smirked as his opponent was lifted to his feet and thrown on his ass. He then watched as Michael literally crawled to his car, got in, and drove off. Not bad for a guy who couldn't catch his breath for another half a minute. I was still staring at my departing admirer when Lisa returned. She followed my gaze with a puzzled expression on her face. "Where's Michael going?" "He decided not to stay here." "You didn't hurt him, did you? I told you he wasn't a threat." "Didn't you ask yourself if I was a threat to him?" "Why would I do that?" "I didn't think so. I don't think he thinks so either." Lisa absent-mindedly picked up her cell phone. A very unfashionable man snatched it from her, wedged it between the bricks of the house and the concrete walkway around it. Then, with a single blow, he smashed it completely. Lisa stared at the phone, then at me like I was an alien. "But I love him. I just want to make sure he's okay." "And you don't see anything wrong with that statement, do you, wife?" "But Thunderchild says everything is fine." "Come in, Lisa. Looks like you're starting from a half-finished script." This brilliant sarcasm didn't please Lisa at all. She smiled at me as if in sincere gratitude. I led her into the living room. When she sat down next to me on the couch, I moved defiantly to one of the chairs across from her. I gave her as much time as she needed to gather her thoughts. After all, I was the one who had rudely disrupted her plan. "Dave, it all started when I first came to Thunderchild." "I'm sorry to interrupt, Lisa. I know I should have asked this months ago, but is she really a qualified counselor?" "Pretty much, Dave. She's in her second year of social work school." "So not qualified, but that didn't stop you from dating her, did it?" "You've never met her, Dave. She's so wise, so lively. She got to the bottom of our problem, and I realized she was the right choice." "And what is the core of our problem, Lisa? In Thunderchild's humble opinion?" "She told me that my self-esteem issues stem from the fact that you take me for granted, Dave. You treat me like property rather than an equal member of our marital team. In short, you're repressing me." She said our partnership is unbalanced, and not just because— I hate to say it, Dave, because I'm out of your league. She said I just need to do something to get you out of your, as she rightly put it, relationship lethargy. Far from it, but I'm proud of myself for not exploding at that moment. You know, the way cartoon characters' eyes bulge with surprise. That's exactly how my brain felt. The depth of Lisa's self-deception was staggering, and then I remembered her habit of magnifying herself and her actions while deflating everything I do. Where to start? "What exactly did I do to displease you, Lisa?" "Well, Dad was a doctor, and well, you're just a salesman. But I don't want to dwell on that, Dave. It's not your fault you didn't have the opportunities Dad had. Anyway, I figured the best way to shock you is to pretend you had a lover and then kind of let you find out about him. That way you'd appreciate what you have in me. Then, I would agree to give him up, in exchange for you treating me as an equal, giving me the respect due a daughter of the moon goddess." Yeah, you may be wondering why I didn't die laughing at that statement. It was believed by a group of her psychotic friends. It seemed to be a mixture of Buddhism and paganism. Up until now, I thought it was harmless. I guess I screwed up. Looking back, I realized I was too stunned to respond. But at some point, everything went downhill. I met Michael, and he turned out to be really nice. He's better than you. He works in an office, a supervisor. Lisa glowed with pride. His hands are always soft and clean. Sorry, I got distracted. Anyway, we started dating and I started having feelings for him. It wasn't part of the plan and I didn't know what to do. I stopped seeing him for a week to think about it. Then I realized it was time to rub your nose in it so you'd start fighting for me. But when it came down to it, I couldn't do it. Call me a coward if you want, but after loving you for so many years, I realized I just couldn't do it. Couldn't hurt you like that. In that week away from Michael, I realized that I love him. I know he loves me. He can't tear himself away from me. It's like what it was like between us 10 years ago before you settled down. At that moment, I was too stunned to speak. I had only experienced a feeling like that once before. I was fighting a bushfire. It was early evening when fires usually slow down due to the high humidity. The fire was slowly rolling down the hill against the wind. Myself and a few other volunteers were leisurely building a backfire in a slumber strip about a kilometer from the base of the hill. We were in no hurry as we knew we had a few hours. The fire reached the base of the hill and just burst into flames. Against the wind and growing humidity, it traveled the kilometer between the hill and me in about 2 minutes. It was so huge and strong that I instinctively realized running was a waste of time. Either I would die or he would be stopped by our fire break. At the risk of stating the obvious, I did the latter. The fact is, the sense of horror and admiration I felt then was the same as it is now. Back then, I suggested we break up to sort out my feelings for Michael. When you wouldn't let me go willingly, I realized I couldn't leave without telling you the real reason. I loved you too much, Dave, and I couldn't hurt you. So I went back to sneaking around behind your back. That way I could explore my feelings for Michael without hurting you. How do you spell delusional logic? I could see that Lisa was really confused. Well, she's not stupid and subconsciously should realize this is complete nonsense. Time to do some fact-finding. So Lisa, I assume you wanted to sleep with him, but you couldn't get around your old-fashioned values of not sleeping with someone you don't love. Maybe that's why you fell in love with him. Nay, perhaps because I seemed to be taking the conversation seriously, Lisa paused to think about it. In that moment, I realized that she wasn't fully aware of her feelings. She also confirmed that she had slept with him and felt no guilt about it. Weird. But things got even weirder. Lisa suddenly smiled. Maybe, Dave. But I've done well, haven't I? I've been sleeping with him for 2.5 months now, and you haven't a clue about anything. I've done everything I can to make sure you don't notice any difference. Tell me you've noticed a difference in my behavior, a difference in my love for you. Has our love changed in any way? No, because I love you now as I always have. Michael is not a part of us. He is outside of us. I also want you to know that he doesn't get anything that you don't get. You and I have sex 3 times a week, just like Michael and I do. You and I see each other once every 2 weeks, just like Michael and I do. So you found out about Michael and me. Nothing has to change. I promise you'll never see the difference. I finally found my voice. I decided to burst a few logic bubbles. Lisa, looking back, I can see the difference. I didn't notice it at the time because I trusted you and thought we were equally committed to each other. Wasn't that foolish of me? I assume you've been seeing Michael on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That's when you try to look your best. I haven't noticed any difference in your movements since you don't work and I'm on the road all day making a living on my own. As for our sex life, I noticed an increase in quantity but a decrease in quality, like you were just repeating movements. I just thought it was part of your treatment. The treatment you refused to discuss with me. I paused to see if that got through to her. I noticed how she flinched when I used the words trust and loyalty, and when I pointed out that she was using her slacker behavior to deceive me. When she stopped volunteering, I decided to find out the limits of her delusions. So you're asking me if the current agreement can be maintained. This spared her any feelings of shame or guilt. I knew they were there. Even without her facial expressions, I knew that no amount of self-deception could completely hide the deeply buried feelings. No, I'm not asking Dave. It's important for me to assert myself so you stop dominating me. So what's next for us? Are you going to leave me and go off with Michael? I don't know, Dave. You interrupted my plans before I fully disclosed my feelings for Michael. He treats me better than you do, but I'm old enough to realize that's probably only because our love is new and fresh. He has plenty of money to spoil me, while we always seem to be having difficulties. I'm confused. I love you both, but this is different somehow. I just don't know, Dave. I knew the money thing was true, but I wasn't about to share the reasons why. I'd paid for a 4-bedroom house, bought it with a family in mind. Years ago, Shithead lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. Yeah, I did some checking, got his license plate number. The other reason was I put all our spare cash into a business. A business that I'd been slowly taking out of Lisa's control ever since I'd discovered the car belonged to Michael Smith and then convinced myself that Michael and Thunderchild were 2 different people. I needed more time. This eagle was once an Eagle Scout. The Scout's motto has always been, be prepared. I really regretted letting my trust in Lisa dominate my actions over the last 2 months. I still couldn't believe how much her fundamental beliefs had changed. I also regretted that the time I should have spent on business at this critical moment had prevented me from spying on Lisa during her charity days. There must be some factor I was missing. So where does that leave me, Lisa? Or should I say us? Well, I was talking to Michael last night and he made a valid argument. It's not fair that you live with me and provide for me almost entirely while he only gets me partially 3 days a week. Oh yes, I was wondering how it is that he works in an office and yet sees you during the day. Sam, He starts work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and toils until 11 o'clock. Every other Wednesday, he has a day off. Like I said, Michael thinks it's unfair that he sees me so infrequently. He wants to take me on vacation. He has an RV, so it should be fun. We were gonna go when I suggested we break up, but you ruined it. Now that you know about him, I think it's only fair that I spend more time with him. I'm sorry I ruined your holiday with your boyfriend, wife. Once again, that sarcastic sarcasm was completely out of character for her. I'm going to have to do a little research on the hallucinations. They were mind-boggling in their magnitude. I had to do something to shake her up. You have no idea how much you hurt me with your betrayal, do you? How much damage you've done? Oh no, you can't blame it on me. If you had just gone along with our idea of breaking up and stayed out of my business, we wouldn't be talking right now, and you wouldn't be hurt. The logic is there, of course, but damn. God, there had to be some way to overcome her defenses. Guilt was clearly not helping. Of course, it didn't matter. Her fate had already been sealed half an hour ago. The reflection was interrupted when she went to the bathroom again. I started again when she returned. So you're going on a love vacation with Michael, and then what? Well, I'm not naive enough to think that after a 2-week vacation I'll be sure which path I'll choose. I'll have to see how I feel. I'll either stay with him for a few more weeks or come back here. When I come back, I promise you'll show me how much you love me. I assure you. I'll make my decision with an open heart. You'll see that nothing will change. How long do you plan to keep this up, Lisa? Just until I make a decision, Dave. I'm not foolish enough to expect you both to be with me for long. I really don't know how long it will take, but rest assured, as soon as I make a decision, I'll let one of you know. Please don't demand a time commitment from me. This is too important for that. This time, I headed for the bathroom. Maybe the splash of cold water would awaken me from my sleep. But that couldn't really happen, could it? One of the things that confused me, and there were only about 1,000 of them, was how her counselor fit into all of this. I sat back down, continuing to daydream sadly. What bothers me, Lisa, is that if your counselor recommended you do selfless charity work and you dated Michael instead, how are you going to recover? I mean, why go to a counselor and then ignore what she said? And finally, signs of shame. Lisa broke eye contact for a long pause. Dave, she didn't recommend that I do charity work. This whole fictitious affair was her idea. I was a little worried when I found Michael and really fell in love with him. But I consulted Thunderchild, and she said it was fine. What's more, she said it was for the best. She said it would be much more convincing that way. Honestly, it was hard for me to justify sleeping with him, but she said it was okay. It wasn't cheating because it was under doctor's orders. Lisa smiled, remembering their joke together in the past. I sat there opening and closing my mouth like a goldfish. How do you get through to someone who justifies anything by saying it's okay because a half-educated hippie bitch said it was okay? How do you get rid of that smug smile? Lisa, how would you react if I did a stunt like that to you? Would I come home and say I met another woman and wanted to spend time with her to see if I loved her more than you? The smile grew even wider. Yes, Thunderchild said you'd ask that. She calls you my caveman, you know that. But look at you, Dave. You're an electrician. You're lucky to have me. You'll never meet anyone who could love you as much as I do. In answer to your question, I hope that if the situation were reversed, I would be big enough to understand your dilemma. It would only encourage me to fight harder. Her face softened dramatically. Look, Dave, I don't want you to think I don't feel your pain. I can imagine what you're going through. I'm just sorry you made it necessary. She stood up as if about to leave. I desperately wanted to hurt her a little before she did. Besides, I'm basically an honest person. Before you go, Lisa, I want you to know that the deal I told you about when you tried to leave last time is still in effect. If you leave the gate, it's over. I'll consider this a request for a divorce. There's no going back. Lisa smiled again. Thunderchild said you'd try to bluff too, Dave. Just look at it from my point of view. The worst that could happen is that I end up with Michael, richer and happier. You can't bluff without cards, Dave. The bitch knew I was bluffing, but completely misrepresented the reason why. My company accountant said I needed at least another month to transfer ownership of the company. So I took a desperate step. Listen, Lisa, no matter what happens, I will feel responsible for you until you marry someone worthy. Especially since I now know that you are much sicker than I realized. That responsibility includes protecting you from a man who is so low that he would steal a married woman away from her husband, a coward who will walk away and allow the love of his life to be left alone against her enraged husband. Finally, I realized I had gotten through to her. Deep down, she remembered her old values. I don't know how deep her deep shame was hidden, but I knew it was still there. Overjoyed at the prospect of returning the pain, I said more than I should have. It risked ruining my newly hatched plan, but after all, I'm only human. If you think I'm going to sit here like a statue and wait for you to toss me some scraps, you're wrong. Just like I'm not going to let you and that nasty clam who stole my wife sail happily off into the sunset, though perhaps you deserve each other. An immoral onanist and a whore who broke her marriage vows. Yes, modern man is dead. The caveman has become the supreme ruler. I watched the pain seep into her soul. Then I watched the filters in her head do their evil work. The smile returned. You're bluffing again, David. Keep the lights on. I'll be back in 2 weeks, a month tops. She turned away toward the front door. The conversation was over. The ultimatum was set. As she walked out the door, she saw the remains of her cell phone. No, I'll call you and give you my new cell phone number. Don't worry, I won't need it. She looked confused. Why, Dave? If you don't have my number, how can you call me before I get back? I'm never calling you again. Stick your number where the sun don't shine. I saw the filters working again and the smile returned. Look, Dave, I'm really sorry I had to do it this way. I know I hurt you, and I'd give anything to avoid it. But I think we're both better off if I don't have to hide behind your back. I hate it when you make me do that. It really stresses me out and makes it hard for me to relax around you. If you love me as much as I love you, we'll be fine. I'll see you soon. No, goodbye, Lisa. Call me before you come over next time. We have an open marriage now, and I might be entertaining a lady, if you know what I mean. She paused. What's an open marriage, Dave? You know, Lisa, it's when a married couple sleeps with other people outside of marriage. Lisa reacted instinctively. She turned and took 2 steps in my direction. Then she stopped and her smile returned. She realized it was a cheap tactic to get her to contradict what she had said earlier. Still smiling, she headed to her car and drove off. I wondered when she would find out that I had taken all the bank cards out of her wallet. I had also taken off her rings before she went to her mom's house yesterday. If her lover was going to mess around with her for the next month, he could pay her bills. I went back inside to call my accountant. There had to be a way to speed up the legal process of selling the company. In the evening, Lisa's mother called to get an update. I told the simple truth. Not because I vindictively wanted to hurt Lisa more, but simply because even cavemen are honest guys. Besides, we'd always consulted about Lisa's problems, from her deteriorating mental health to the fact that we were forcing her to find a counselor. Her mom suggested, whatever happens to us as a couple, we should take steps to get Tonda killed out of Lisa's life. I couldn't agree more. The last thing her mom had told me was that no matter what happened, she would be there for her. I read between the lines. She understood that her daughter had crossed a line. She cleared my conscience. That night, Mr. Michael Smith was attacked in his driveway and his wallet was stolen. When the police visited him in the hospital, he described his attacker as a man over 6 feet tall and wearing a ski mask. Surprisingly, the police never came to see me. Apparently, it's a rough neighborhood. What a waste of an alibi. Rewiring the shed in front of 2 intelligence witnesses. I watched his apartment the next day when Lisa brought him home from the hospital. He was slouching a little. It was broken ribs. He also walked like an old cowboy. Swollen testicles do that to a guy. The next day I called a locksmith because when I got home, I found many of Lisa's things missing. She had also left her new phone number. I wrote it down in my cell phone so I would know which calls to ignore. 2 weeks later, I watched Lisa and him load the caravan parked in the driveway, already attached to his car. This activity dragged on late into the night under the blinding light of the newly installed security lights. The next evening, I drove by the apartment and saw a strange sight. A car with its nose turned up to the sky and a shattered windshield over the steering wheel. The rear axle of the car along with the wheels was a meter behind the trunk. Behind them lay a van lying on its side. An experienced forensic scientist would have quickly solved this mystery. The driver, who had started the engine to pull the heavy van into the driveway, backed up as the chain securing the rear axle of the vehicle to the tree reached its limit. The sudden jolt caused the rear dolly to dislocate, and by Newton's first law of motion, the driver's head hit the windshield. Mick should have been wearing a seatbelt. The jolt from the suddenly taut chain under the cartwheel flipped him onto his side. Damn kids and their annex. On another occasion. 2 more nights and I'll have the wiring in the men's shed completely rewired. Neither the happy couple nor the police have yet to connect me to these 2 incidents. Gudo. Lisa left 2 messages on my phone. She reminded me that she loved me and inquired about my health. I bought a fancy new phone and happily reprogrammed it. Most calls were forwarded to my old number. Calls from Lisa were forwarded to the player's anonymous number. I figured that was appropriate since she was embarking on the biggest adventure of her life. When Michael got home the evening after the incident, his head was bandaged and he started to fall again. Hitting the steering wheel with those healed ribs must have been very painful. I'm sure that while he enjoyed my wife's company, he didn't enjoy her skills in the bedroom. I asked around my boys to see which of them had broken ribs in the past. The one I found explained that it took a good month before he could engage in anything resembling normal activity. So, 4 weeks after the first beating, Michael was attacked again. Coincidentally, again a 6-footer, but wearing a different ski mask. He was beaten again, and he was covered in bruises all over, especially in his groin area. In addition, his wallet was stolen again. This time I was visited by the local police. So did the member of the men's shed whose house I was installing new light fixtures in at the time of the incident. It's amazing how the men's shed charter works. Men support each other in times of need. As far as I have been able to find out, Michael has been in the hospital for 3 days now. It's hard to tell, he hasn't changed cars yet. Whether he wasn't insured or they didn't honor his claim, I just don't know. It doesn't matter. The messages from Lisa to my landline were becoming more frequent and more discouraging. She must have been lonely in that apartment, but not desperate enough to realize how seriously I was bluffing. She was a confident little liar, I had to hand it to her. I was a little surprised she hadn't come for sex. Apparently, she'd been waiting a long time for it. Sometimes I would watch Michael work at 11 p.m., just for a laugh. It was comical to watch him open a window on the second floor and carefully scan the parking lot for a good 5 minutes before deciding to step out. Heck, that probably makes me a terrorist. This observation also allowed me to notice another pattern that will come in handy in the future. 2 weeks later, I finally got the call from the accountant I had been waiting for. My company was no longer owned by me, but by some guy in the Cayman Islands. I hope to meet him someday. He was in high demand due to that big government contract I got a couple months ago. I was back to being a simple electrician. I guess Lisa was right. I would always be a salesman. It was time to put an end to this charade. That same evening, I located Michael's office. A little after 10 p.m., one of the cleaning ladies came out the side door to dump a few bags of trash into the dumpster. I snuck through the ajar door and hid behind the receptionist's desk. There were no cameras there that I could spot. I grabbed the phone book off the receptionist's desk. There he was, Mr. Michael Smith. Hell, he was a supervisor. A construction supervisor. That's like a janitor, isn't it? I think he worked nights doing maintenance and supervising the janitors. I was confused. If it was a laborer, then who was I? My first hunch, to look in the basement, paid off. There was only one lighted room, and it revealed a slumbering Michael Smith. His feet were on the table. I patted him on the shoulder, and he jumped to his feet like he was at Cape Canaveral. I was going to give him another whipping, but he looked so pathetic I just didn't have the guts. He stared into my face, an expression of horror blooming like a flower in a sped-up nature movie. He voluntarily backed himself into a corner. My hands on his lapels helped. He didn't say anything, so I did. "Hey, Michael, aren't you going to greet an old friend?" He grasped one of my words. "A friend?" "Yes, of course. After all, this is the 4th time we've met." A realization of my meaning flashed across his face. I hadn't realized there was any other expression than horror. "Relax, Mikey. Nothing will happen unless you answer my next 4 questions incorrectly. Got it?" A nod. "Are you going to report this encounter to the police?" Shake. "Are you going to tell Lisa about this encounter?" Shake. "Will you entertain another man's wife as long as you live?" Shake it off. "All right, now then. Do you realize what will happen if you break this agreement?" Vigorous nod. "This concludes our meeting. Have a happy and peaceful life." Having accomplished this community service and smelling urine with my nose, like a caveman, I cautiously crawled outside the same way I came in. I can happily say that I have no idea when Lisa was evicted from Michael's safe apartment. Either it was that night and she left for her mother's, or he was generous enough to shelter her for the night. I figured she never found out that I'd changed the locks. Surely that would have triggered a disturbing phone call at some point. Speaking of phone calls, I heard nothing that night or the next day. With no leads, I decided to guess when she would show up. I was lucky. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening when I heard a scraping sound, like trying to insert a key that no longer fit the door lock. Almost a minute later, the doorbell rang. I opened it in my robe. Lisa was there, of course. I don't know how I expected to see her, but probably not from the fact that she was well-dressed, wearing makeup, but looking slightly alarmed at how I was greeted. When she stepped toward me to kiss me, I gingerly stepped aside and took off her coat. I invited her into the house as a guest and we sat down at the kitchen table. She only had one way to play a prank on me, and I wasn't disappointed. "So Lisa, what can I do for you?" It was, in fact, intentional to phrase the question the way I would have phrased it for a guest or client. However, the effort was in vain. "I have good news, Dave. I've made a decision, and it's one you're going to like." She paused to follow the look of anticipation on my face. "I'm sorry. I'm not that good of an actor." I continued to stare at her sadly. She seemed unfazed and continued. "I was right about new love. When the novelty of being in a relationship with Michael wore off, I realized that I don't love him the way I love you. Besides, I don't think he was really as well off as he led me to believe. After a few weeks, he stopped spoiling me like he used to and asked me to cut back. On top of that, he started having health problems. I stopped having sex with him 6 weeks ago, if that makes you feel any better. Now I have time to open up, get it all out of my head, and realize that I want to get back with you. Isn't that good news?" "Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Did he finally kick you out?" "I don't know what you mean, Dave. I made my decision last night and told him it was over between us. It was too late to come here, so I went to my mom's." "When did you learn that lying is so easy, Lisa? He kicked you out last night, and thank God." Sitting up and rubbing my knuckles, I watched the realization dawn on Lisa's face. 3 beatings, 1 car accident, and a sudden change in his intentions had all taken time. "Well, I'm back now, David, so we can get back to where we were before." I laughed out loud. About 10 seconds later, Fiona came out of our bedroom. I'll describe her for you. Fiona was only 22 years old. She had a slender body and a much better face than plain. Even without makeup, she made Lisa look bad. Fiona said, "Hi," as she walked by, took a glass from the cupboard, filled it with milk and walked out again. As she walked past, she gave me a peck on the cheek. Lisa didn't say anything, but gave me the best goldfish act I'd ever seen. "I'm sorry, Lisa, but I suggested you call before you came here. I didn't want you to find out like this, but it's not my fault you came unannounced. Look on the bright side. At least now we don't have to sneak around behind your back. This has gone on long enough." Finally, Lisa regained her composure. "Do you have a girlfriend?" "Yes, Lisa. When you left, I was in a deep depression. I started drinking. I met a guy called Bluey at the pub and he said I had self-esteem issues. He had once done an adult woodworking course, so it seemed he could offer advice. He assured me that he had learned something from all 3 of his ex-wives. Anyway, after I told him that I'd been rejected by a girl out of my league, he said I needed to socialize with a wide variety of girls to figure out exactly what was in my league. Fiona is the 3rd one I've tried to socialize with. I know she's a little old, maybe a little plain and chubby, but she seems happy to socialize with this simple tradesman. Her father was a simple boiler man." I paused so that Lisa could mentally compare my age, appearance, and figure with the charming vision that now lay in her bed. However, that was all the time I had given her. "Yeah, she works, cooks, seems to like sex more than 3 times a week, and is pretty loud when we do it. And she doesn't treat me like a burden who not only brings in all the income, but has to do her share of the housework and gardening. I love her already, but it's a different kind of love than ours, fresher and brighter. I'm old enough to realize that perhaps it's simply because our love is newer, less stale." Judging by the look on Lisa's face, her blood pressure had reached dangerous levels. I didn't want to fall in love with her, but I consulted with Bluey and he said it's fine. my ego will still be restored. My love for Fiona shouldn't change what you and I have. After all, I've been sleeping with her for 4 weeks now, and you can't say you've noticed any difference in the way I treat you, can you? I have no idea how much irony there was in that, but I felt it was all necessary for the success of my plan. I paused to see how she took it. From the looks of it, not very well. I totally agree with Bluey's advice. Well, I can say that with relief. I'd hate to hurt you, you know that, but I haven't had time to fully explore my feelings for Fiona yet. Decide which one of you I love more. I'm not naive enough to think that after such a short period of time, I'll be sure which path I'll choose. We'll see. I promise to let you know my decision as soon as I make it. If you leave again, you'll see that nothing will change. I'm not foolish enough to expect you both to be with me for long. Please don't demand some sort of time frame from me. Everything is too important for that. Confirmation that not all of my words had reached Lisa's consciousness was her next statement. You can't expect me to live here with that troll. You're my husband, Dave. Your wife is already back, so she'll have to leave. Ah, yes. Bluey warned me you might go for that rod. He said if you did, I should exercise self-control. I know it's unwise to ask the two of you to share a house, so if you go back to your mother, I'll let you know when I've made my decision. At this point, I took advantage of her utter bewilderment, lifted her to her feet, and led her to the door. Standing on the threshold and handing her my purse and coat, I whispered in her ear, "Can you feel my pain yet?" As I slammed the door shut, I didn't hear her car pull away for another 10 minutes. I was completely unprepared for what I discovered when I got home the next evening. Lisa was cooking dinner, with a bill from the locksmith and a new key on the table and a court order next to her insisting that she had every right to remain in the marital home. How was I to know that one of her meditation group was a lawyer? From the few words we exchanged, it was clear that Lisa's confidence had returned to her. Oh, crap. While she continued to cook, I moved her things from my bedroom to the spare bedroom and then packed an overnight bag and left without a word. I had a couch and a shower at work, so I could hide there indefinitely. I ignored all phone calls. I decided to come home the next night after dinner. Lisa was watching television. She tried to hug me from behind while I made tea, but I pulled away. She asked where her rings were, and I told her that this merchant had to sell them to make ends meet. She was shocked by this and opened her mouth to say something, but changed her mind and went back to the TV. I was a little surprised that she was still in the spare room. For once, I didn't know her plan of action, if, of course, she had one. In the middle of the night, I felt her sliding naked across my bed. I told her unequivocally that she needed to know I was a loyal man. I would never cheat on Fiona. She left, sobbing quietly. On Friday, she came home from meditation and found me cuddled up with Fiona on the couch. She stared at her intently until Fiona was completely uncomfortable. We just got up and went to the bedroom. The next morning, Fiona had another t-shirt parade while she made us breakfast in bed. She simply ignored Lisa. That set the course of action for the next 2 weeks. I was either not at home or I was there with Fiona. I hardly spoke to Lisa at all. I still did my shopping, but I became very curious about what Lisa was using as money. I solved that problem when I looked in her purse one day. It still contained copies of Michael's bank cards. The stupid jerk must have forgotten to cancel them. He was in for a surprise when he got his next statement. 2 weeks later, I was leaving for work when Lisa asked me to come over to the house in the evening so we could talk. I returned with Fiona, much to Lisa's dismay. Numerous attempts to persuade her to leave had failed, but she began her prepared speech anyway. "Dave, this isn't fair. When I left for Michael's, I told you I'd come back and give you a chance to propose to me. Now you've turned things around, but you won't let me do the same to you. How can I if him isn't around all the time?" "I'm sorry, Lisa, but those were your rules, not mine." "Well, it's time to decide. It's either me or this." She tossed the divorce petition on the table. I flipped through it. Blank, unsigned. "Bluey warned me you'd try to bluff." "It's definitely not a bluff. How can I prove it?" "By signing it." With a determined look, but with some hesitation, Lisa took the pen and signed. Once again, the conversation went differently than she had imagined. After signing, she dropped the pen and stared at me. I couldn't believe my luck. "I still think you're bluffing, Lisa. Can I get this straight? You haven't worked in 3 years forcing me to be the sole breadwinner. even refusing to help with the business. You do all the housework, shopping, and yard work. We ate takeout every other night because you didn't have time to cook. The only time you cared about your appearance was when you were dating your boyfriend. You allowed yourself to relax, and honestly, you disappointed me a little in bed. You lied to me openly and without secrecy, not to mention having fun with another guy behind my back. In doing so, you proved yourself completely unworthy of my trust and respect. But worst of all, you've condemned me to a childless future, and you still think you can dictate terms? I'd be lying if I said I hadn't enjoyed Lisa's embarrassment so far, but that last statement gave me no pleasure. I watched each of my truths crash into Lisa's mind. She watched nauseatedly as I signed the papers, then handed them to Fiona so she could witness both autographs. When she was done, I folded them up and tucked them in my pocket. Lisa just followed the papers with her eyes. I figured you were bluffing, Lisa. Too bad you thought I was bluffing when you told you our marriage was over if you walked out the gate to your janitor. In fact, it was over the first time you slept with that little jerk. But Dave, you always said an eagle would never leave its mate. Yes, Lisa, but I never said I'd stop a fellow eagle from leaving him. Again, the goldfish dominated for a few minutes. Then, if you knew our marriage was over when I left, why did you ruin my relationship with Michael? It got so bad that he was afraid to leave the house at night. It was the boyfriend's doing, Lisa. He stole something that belonged to me and I couldn't rest until he paid for it. Besides, I took what I said that time seriously. Until we are finally divorced, I will feel responsible for you. I couldn't let you have a relationship with that little shit. A final spark of defiance flashed in Lisa's eyes. I can go back to him. I'm sure he'll take me back and take care of me. I simply laced the fingers of both hands together and bent them back. They cracked spectacularly. Ready, Lisa? Lisa did pretty much the only thing she had left to do. She flew away. Epilogue. The following Friday night, Lisa's mom arrived. I invited her into the house. She showed no hostility toward me, which I took to mean understanding on her part. She expressed surprise that my girlfriend wasn't home and asked where she was. I looked at my watch and said that at this time of day she was probably at a restaurant on the tropical island where she lived. When she raised an eyebrow questioningly, I explained that in appreciation of her services, I had arranged for her and her fiancé to take a week's vacation at company expense. They both had a very understanding boss, some guy who owned an electrical contracting business. I also expressed my joy at being able to sleep in my own bed again after she left, instead of on a mattress on the floor. I swear I saw the delight in her eyes. Then we got down to business. She was here to negotiate a divorce. My generous offer to split all of our assets, except for the company, 50/50ths, made it quick and easy to settle. She didn't try to get a piece of the business, knowing that her daughter had not put a penny or a finger on it. We parted as friends. I returned Lisa's cards to her and explained that she could use them for reasonable expenses until the divorce was finalized. I didn't bother explaining that the limits had been drastically reduced. I'm not stupid. That was 14 days ago. Last Friday, I was on duty near meditation, and then I walked down a short and wide student path to a lonely old house. The old shabby bomber sported a personalized T-Child license plate. I was walking back to my car this evening, having just replaced the matching fuse wire with one that was clearly too big. Then, after a bit of breaking and entering, as befits a humble electrician, I damaged the light switch right in front of the front door. Let's just say that Thunderchild was about to get struck by lightning. If that didn't work, I was ready to rename my axe handle Lightning. I think after 6 or 8 episodes of him being tossed around the room by 240 volts or exploding appliances, he'd be ready. Then we could have a chat about how wise it is to give advice without being qualified. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.